like if you do the math, you realize the chess that Cat Williams was playing, he's the one that really won. You know what I mean? And Shannon, I'm sure, is very happy to have that interview on his platform, but Cat is the one that really is going to ultimately make the most money out of this whole situation. Yeah, Shannon, when I met Shannon, he said he would do Vlad TV, and then he just kind of never did it.
You probably get a lot of that, huh? Yeah, I'll do it. And then
I don't know why people do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I remember when I ran into Kevin Gates at the grocery store, and I'm like, yo, you know, it's been some years since we did an interview, and we were chopping up. He's like, nah, I'm not really doing a lot of interviews right now. I'll be honest with you, bro. And, you know, I'm like, all right, cool. You know, I got his assistant's number, and like, all right, cool, we'll stay in contact. I'd rather have people just tell me flat out, like, yeah, you know, not right now. As opposed to, yeah, I got you, let's do it. Then you're sitting there wasting time and resources.
If you had an artist signed to you, what would you tell them about what interviews to do and how often to do it? Because it feels like your interview strategy for an artist these days is pretty important. And you could easily blow yourself out, make yourself look like you're not important by doing too many interviews. How would you advise an artist in that regard?
I mean, an interview with someone that nobody's ever heard of, who doesn't have an extremely exceptional story, is just not going to do numbers for anyone involved. It's going to be a waste of time for the interviewer and the interviewee. And then on top of that, as you start to build, when you try to get other interviews, they're going to look at the numbers of those previous interviews and possibly pass because of how low those numbers are. So not everyone is meant to be in front of the camera talking. There's lots of huge artists like Kendrick or J. Cole who really just never do interviews at all. 21
just put an album out, didn't do any interviews.
Didn't do a single interview. Not one.
Doesn't need to.
Doesn't need to.
And on the Drake and 21 album that they put out prior to that, they actually kind of like lampooned the media world that we live in right now, because they did the fake Tiny Desk concert, the fake Howard Stern interview, the fake Vogue cover. So it was kind of like their way of saying,
we're not doing interviews.
We don't need y'all.
Yeah.
And you're all going to pay attention to us anyway.
And they don't. And they don't. Not everyone needs interviews. But for a number of people, interviews have transformed their lives. You know, like people like Mob James, where I gave him his first big interview, and that turned into a whole podcast career. Lots of people that we've, you know, like a Tony Yayo, who, I mean, Tony Yayo is Tony Yayo, and we all acknowledge that, but he was very quiet for about a decade. He didn't see him. He didn't put out a lot of music. He didn't put his face in front of the camera. I brought him on Vlad TV, and it blew up. And then from then on, he was Drink Champs, Breakfast Club, Math Hoffa. You know, he's now like a regular on the interview circuit, and with that comes more shows, more streams, more everything. You know, he realized that, hey, there's something here. People actually want to hear what I have to say, and he has a personality for that. But you take a brand new rapper and you put him in front of the camera, and there's not a big cosign involved. There's not another big artist sitting next to him. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've done interviews with some of Boosie's artists, and when he's there is very different than when he's not there. You see what I'm saying? When he's sitting next to the artist, people are paying more attention. But if it's the artist by themselves, it ends up not doing very well. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of times you need to build up to the point of even doing an interview, which may take years.
Right.
You probably shouldn't do any interviews leading up to that. But comes down to the story. You know, Scarlett, we interviewed her, is still getting millions of views. You know what I'm saying? And then she got a big record deal right afterwards. And, you know, I'm sure the label looked at the numbers of our interview, and when they saw, okay, she got a real story, there's a lot of very deep stuff that goes behind this young girl. You know, I'm sure they're more open to, okay, yeah, we feel more confident about putting some extra money behind this check, and, you know, putting a little more push behind it, because, she went on Vlad TV, and that was at the time her biggest interview yet. Well, no, I think even to this day it's her biggest interview yet. So,
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird decision, because I noticed that at one point Bootleg Kev asked you to come on his show.
Yeah, me and him had a conversation about that.
And he kind of aired it out that you said your platform's not really big enough. It doesn't really benefit me, so I'm gonna have to say no at this time. Which to me sounded like the conversation that you had with Kevin Gates, which is kind of like, I'm just not really feeling it at this time.
Yeah.
But you gave him a reason, which is actually more honest, to say like your platform's maybe not big enough at this time for it to make sense for me.
Yeah, no, he went on the Danza podcast because he had mentioned this, I think, on his own podcast once with, I forgot who it was. And then he went on Danza and he mentioned it again.
Okay.
And I had to call him after that because he was like, oh, yeah, you know, I asked Vlad last year to do it. And I'm like, it wasn't last year. It was like 3 years ago.
Oh, okay.
I was like, I got the text message. Here's our actual, it was like 2.5 years ago or something. And I'm like, yo, when you asked me this, you were just starting out your platform. And I was very honest with you. And I'm standing behind what I said. I said at the time, like, yeah, you know, something, your platform's not big enough right now, but let's just keep in touch. And what I said was, you could say that story, but don't twist the numbers up. Don't make it sound like you hit me last week and I just blew you off. You know, after your NBA Youngboy interview. No, that's not what happened. You were just starting out. And I was honest enough to tell you, not right now. You should keep building up your platform so people like me will get some sort of value off doing those interviews. Because it has to be both ways.
Right.
Right? Like, yeah, you can do favors for people, but ultimately they want to be on a platform that millions of people watch. Or else I'd rather be spending my time doing something else. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I could make money while I'm doing an interview on someone else's platform. So I'm giving up money by being, you know, on top of me bringing security and, you know what I'm saying, taking time out of my day and shifting my schedule around. Like doing an interview on someone's platform costs me money.
Right.
So all I'm saying is make it worthwhile for me as well. I understand you'll get benefit out of it. I got it. But for things to really work, there needs to be mutual benefit. So me and him had that conversation. I'm like, yeah, and I'll, you know, now that your platform is bigger, you know, let's just set up something in 2024.
Right.
And he was like, oh, you're right. You know, my bad. Like I twisted up the numbers a little bit.
Because it's kind of like, okay, I have a friend who has like a smaller podcast, kept asking me to do it. I finally said, okay, I'll do it. But it was at like a time in which it was, you know, distinctly after the Jason Love cuck arc that I went through and everything. It was kind of like, it was just at a time where there wasn't really a lot going on. I didn't really have a lot to talk about. I'm just fucking sitting in this chair doing interviews like 8 hours a day. So it's not really like I had much that I felt like I wanted to talk about, but he kept asking me. So I did it. It gets 20,000 views. Like, you know, some of the clips probably did all right or whatever, but it's like, it didn't really benefit me to do media at that moment because I didn't really have anything I was pushing. I didn't really have anything exciting to talk about. And it doesn't really benefit him either because it doesn't really do any significant number of views. Right. And it makes it so that, like, realistically, I'm probably not going to come back and do your podcast again for another couple of years. Right. So to me, it's kind of like, I probably could have been doing him an even better favor if I kind of like explained all that. But then when you are in the middle of a crazy ass hype cycle, which I've been, like, you know, various times throughout my life, like when the guy put the gun in my face. Okay, boom, I get to go on Logan Paul's podcast right after that, which I probably would not have really had the opportunity to prior. When you are in that like super viral state that you sometimes are, your brain does kind of go to like, well, if I'm going to talk about this, I want to either talk about it on my own platform and be the one getting the money, or I want to make sure that I use this leverage I have right now to try to go on the biggest outlet possible. Yeah, like when the whole KPD thing broke, like I did Pierce Morgan. Right. And that was like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. You know, I'm not mad at this. You know what I'm saying? And I think unfortunately in entertainment as a whole and in hip hop in particular, no one wants to say no. Right. I think a lot of people are scared of what happens when you tell someone no. They don't know what the person's reaction is going to be. Me, myself, I've never had a problem just telling people no and also explaining why that no is there, because I feel like you might feel some type of way, but I'm being honest with you. You're going to have to respect it at one point. And usually it's not a total no, it's just not right now and maybe a later. And I'm being honest with it. If you accept it, you accept it. If you don't, you know, if you want to be mad at me over that, then it is what it is. Yeah, like I interviewed this rapper Lefty Gunplay, who's kind of popping off on more of like a low key, like he's big. He's a Mexican rapper, The Mexican community fucking loves him. He's all over every single one of the Mexican like Instagram pages. He's doing every podcast he could possibly get on. He did mine, did very, very well. But it's like I see the way to him and to the people around him, they're kind of like thinking of just going on podcasts as a good means of doing promotion. From my perspective, it's kind of like once you've done a couple of these interviews, it probably makes sense for you to just chill out, because it's like each person only has like your personality is your fucking superpower as a rapper, especially if it's someone like him who's like unbelievably entertaining and funny. And it's like, if you just are going on a different podcast every week, you're really like sapping that special meter bar to the point where eventually maybe people are going to like fully lose interest. Like we've seen that with Crip Mac. Crip Mac comes on my show. He's doing millions and millions and millions of views. He proceeds to do every single podcast he could possibly get on. At a certain point, those numbers really start dipping. Now, he's somebody who's kind of like sustainably interesting to people, so probably doesn't feel the effects of it as much. But I see this with people constantly, and I kind of want to tell them, like, if you're just spreading yourself this thin, it's not going to end up in a good way.
It's hard to say because every podcast, I mean, every significant podcast has their own audience, and there is overlap. Like, there's overlap between No Jumper and Vlad TV, but there's also a uniqueness with our, there's people who go to No Jumper that never go to Vlad TV, and vice versa.
Right.
So exposing yourself to different podcasts as much as possible and having something to go behind it, if there's strong music, I don't know. I don't really see a downside to that, but who knows?